Death can seem like a bit of a contradiction, maybe in our minds as Christians. A Christian dies, a good person dies. It makes us wonder, why didn't God intervene? Now, certainly we all realize God made us physical. That automatically sets us up for the possibility of injury, of sickness, and yes, eventually death. But still, we wonder. And we also know this is not the only dichotomies we wrestle with in our human lives as we seek to have a relationship with God and to follow Him. The wisdom literature of the Bible, Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, bring such contradictions front and center. In Job, we find the wisdom we find in Job is seeing God. That's one of the final statements of the book of Job. That's one of Job's final statements is, God, now I see you. Okay? It is the understanding the majesty and the sovereignty of God and how we can relate to Him. Now, Job was a righteous man. God said he was. Satan couldn't find any fault either as they were having their conversation. Job had tremendous blessings, tremendous wealth, and then he had tremendous loss. And it was only in that loss that he came to a place where he could really see God and how to relate to Him. Seeing God is not only doing righteousness. And Job found that out. We go to Proverbs then, book that comes after Job, and that springboard from Job, in that it says the understanding or the seeing of God is the beginning of wisdom. That is where wisdom starts. Proverbs then articulates dozens of causes and effects. You follow wisdom, Proverbs says good things happen to you. If you follow foolishness, bad things happen to you. God is fair and just. He rewards the righteous. He punishes sinners. Predictable, cause and effect. We have God's promises of blessings, protection, and guidance. In my world of mathematics, that's kind of what I do these days. If we follow God, life is linear. Okay? It just goes straight ahead. Or so it seems from Proverbs. And we've probably heard messages maybe like that. I've given messages like that. But is that how real life happens 100% of the time? Nice, linear cause and effect. We come to Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes says no. Says no. Proverbs is not the whole story. Random chance happens to all. Bad things happen to good people. The unrighteous are living well. Physical blessings are temporary, and maybe sometimes they feel empty. Time keeps marching, and it carries people and events with it. And life is complex, Ecclesiastes tells us. It can be messy, it tells us. And we may ask ourselves, where is God's intervention? And at the end of the day, as Ecclesiastes says, in a few different places, all die. And there's not really any difference between those who are good and those who are not good. Now, personally, just for me, if I read Proverbs without the view of Ecclesiastes, maybe I can think, well, the relationship with God is kind of transactional. Okay, I do this, I get that. I do this, I get that. Okay, maybe it leads to a little self-righteousness on my part as well. So Proverbs certainly tells us what we should do, and we're going to see that Ecclesiastes backs that up. But Ecclesiastes gives a real life perspective of how life actually happens. So the question we want to look at today is, how can we understand God and our walk with God in an existence that changes regularly, is subject to random chance, knowing that it eventually comes to an end? I'll repeat that. How can we understand God and our walk with God in an existence that changes regularly, is subject to random chance, knowing that it eventually comes to an end? Forgot to take out my clock because I do want to be on time. I thought Mr. Burton was just giving me extra time, but no, that's, he knows I can go a little over. Okay, So today we're going to focus on the wisdom that we can glean from Ecclesiastes. Now, at first glance, when you read Ecclesiastes, and I adopt that as well, it can be a little bit maybe discouraging, maybe a little bit depressing. I do find it, though, in reading through the whole thing to be actually an encouraging book because it acknowledges the real picture of life, even for those who are following God, that life has its downs to go with the ups. And Ecclesiastes says that's real life. We should actually expect that. And that's okay. That's how God set things in motion. And frankly, if you look at the experiences of the people in the Bible, it's a lot like we read in Ecclesiastes. You pick any character in the Bible, and they've experienced Ecclesiastes. I honestly can't think of one who didn't. Even our Savior, Jesus Christ, there were ups and downs in his physical life here, most certainly. And so, now Solomon is generally, we're not going to go a whole lot into the authorship of Ecclesiastes. You can read two scholars get three opinions about that. But Solomon is generally regarded as its author, probably written towards the end of his life. And he's reflecting on a lifetime of experience, is what he's doing. And he had access to it all. He had access to all the physical, material things he could possibly have. He wanted the fanciest car, he could have the fanciest car, okay? The planes, you know, obviously I'm being facetious, but you know as well as I do, he was very well off. But he realized this is not where one finds true meaning. And he literally wrestles in the book with the meaning in life that doesn't follow a set script. That seems like, okay, I really should have it all. I should really have, you know, the depth of meaning because I can have it all, but somehow it's just, he finds it's not there. And he wrestles with that. He struggles with that. And he shares these struggles and conclusions with us. So let's go ahead and start in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. And by no means are we going to exhaust the whole meaning of the book today. But hopefully we can touch on some of the main things. Now, to begin with, I want to try to take a word, eclipse a word out of probably most of our translations, because believe me, I looked up about 30 different translations to this, and most of them have this word or using some version of this word. But I want to go ahead and just grab that before we even start reading, and that's the word vanity. Okay, at the very beginning, we're going to see that's one of the very first words is vanity of vanities. All right, and I profess no great background in Hebrew or anything like this, but in reality, the word I'm going to try to use is the Hebrew word hevel, Hevel. It's actually quite simple to spell out, and hopefully I don't mispronounce it. But it actually doesn't mean vanity or emptiness or meaningless. You go through the 30 translations I went through, and those are predominantly the translations that you find, okay? What it means more is vapor or smoke. If you want to extrapolate that, enigma, maybe fog. And that life can certainly be beautiful, but it's also mysterious and complex. And in reality, hevel is used with two meanings. One, you can't always see through it. If you think of a fog, if you think of vapor, you think of clouds, okay? Can't always see through it, and it's also not solid. It's moving, it's changing, and it's not solid. So let's if we can try to keep that version of that in our minds as we go through here. So let's begin in verse 2, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Says, hevel, says the preacher, hevel, it is all hevel. What profit has a man in all his labor which he toils under the sun? One generation comes and another generation goes. One more warning is I'm gonna use a little bit of Fenchel extrapolation on some of these verses too. Okay, so it won't always be a strict reading of the New King James, but just for sake of time and bring it a little bit modern language. But the earth abides forever. The sun also rises, the sun goes down, hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes to the south, turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes at us again in a circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers come, there they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Let's go to verse 9. And then that which has been, try that again. That which has been is what will be, and that which is done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything that can be said that it may be said that this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. And there's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be remembrance of things that are to come by those who come after. Verse 13. I set my heart to seek and search out wisdom concerning that which is done under the heaven. This is a burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is hevel and grasping for the wind. What is crooked can't be made straight. What is lacking can't be numbered. So Solomon is saying, I set out to do this, but here is what I'm finding. Things come and things go, and it all happens all over again. He talks about the earth rotation. He talks about the rivers. It's the march of time. To look back at a Disney movie, it's a circle of life. There is nothing new. It's been there before. It'll be there again. If you want to think of another movie, Groundhog Day. It repeats. It repeats. The remembrance of the temporary is at some point forgotten. It gets swept up. Our memories fade. People who remember certain things, they eventually pass away as well. Whatever we do in the physical realm comes and goes as a vapor, So another question for us to think about. What can and should we be gleaning through the repeat of our days in the march of time? What can and should we be gleaning through these days that the sun rises, we go off in our routines, we have our regular jobs, we have certain routines at home. What should we be gleaning from the repeat of our days in the march of time? All right, let's go to Ecclesiastes 2, and here I am going to summarize a little bit more in the first part. And I said to my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, with fun, with mirth is one translation. Therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this was also hevel. And I said of laughter, madness, and mirth, what does it accomplish? So he goes on then verses 3 through 9 to describe, I tried it all. I tried all that life, and I could, because he was wealthy. I searched my heart to gratify my flesh with wine without, totally losing my mind and maintain wisdom. I made great works in verse 4. I made myself gardens and orchards in verse 5. I made myself water pools from which to water. I acquired all kinds of servants to take care of my every need. I had greater possessions than anybody, he said. I gathered for myself silver and gold in verse 8 and special treasures. So I became great and excelled more than all those who were before me in Jerusalem, and yet my wisdom remained with me. He maintained sanity. He maintained his focus just by doing all these things. Verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and that was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on the works which my hands had done, the labor which I had toiled, and indeed it was hevel. It was hevel. He said it was grasping for the wind, all these various things to make him happy, to make life enjoyable, to make life comfortable, whatever it was. He said at the end of the day, it ends up being hevel. Verse 13. He says, I did see that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceive that the same event happens to them all. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. Why was I then more wise? And I said to my heart, this is also Hevel. Verse 16, for there is no more remembrance of the wise than the fool forever. Since all that is now forgotten in the days to come, how does a wise man die as the fool? Verse 17, therefore I hated life because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all was Hevel and grasping for the wind. And I hated my labor, which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to somebody else who's going to come after me. He says, the end of the day, everything that I managed to gather, everything I managed to enjoy, he says, can't take it with you. Can't take it with you. Those things that he worked so hard to have. Verse 22, for what man for all of his labor and the striving of his heart has he toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, his work is burdensome, and even in the night his heart takes no rest. Yeah, this is also Hevel. Nothing is better for a man that he should eat and drink, that his soul should enjoy the good of his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. For who can eat and drink more enjoyment than I? So he had great wealth, but then he continually was asking himself, is this what it's all about? Is this what it's all about? Whatever we can gather, whatever that gather may look like in this life. Now, he does say wisdom is better than folly, and we're going to return to that. Okay, so he's not just saying, hey, it doesn't matter at all. That's not what Solomon is saying at all. Okay, so we're going to return to that. Proverbs is also in the Bible, so Proverbs is also applicable, and so we want to stick there, and he does. But he says, we're at some point we're going to leave all this to somebody else. We're going to leave it all to somebody else. And then towards the end here, he starts to touch on, okay, well, then why is this all that is? Okay, why this? Why this life? He says, at one point, you should enjoy what you have. You should enjoy and appreciate and value, and I'm going to use the word glean, that's a favorite biblical word of mine, glean out of that and treasure it. It does say that, and we're going to come back to that as well. But here's another question. Excuse my allergies today. What can and should we be gleaning from our labors while enjoying its fruit, especially knowing we're going to leave it to somebody else? What should we be gleaning out of that besides enjoying it, valuing the time with friends and family? What should we glean, especially knowing we're going to leave it with somebody else? All right, let's move along to Ecclesiastes 3. Maybe the most well-known part of Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season and a purpose for everything under heaven. There's a time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to gain and a time to lose. A time to keep, a time to throw away. There's a time to tear and a time to sow. There's a time to keep silence and a time to speak. There's a time to love and a time to hate. There's a time of war and a time of peace. Now, we as human beings, we tend to want a certain level of consistency, a certain level of comfort, a certain level of predictability. Now, that varies from person to person, okay? Some people want it, those walls pretty tight right here, okay? Others are a little bit more, okay, it can be more out here. But if that is our ultimate goal, then the valleys or maybe the hills of life are going to rattle us. If our ultimate goal is to have just real predictability, real consistency, Solomon says, expect that it's not always going to be that. And he says here, there's actually a time for everything. And there's a purpose for everything. And there's something to be gleaned from all the things that he just went through in these verses. And now sometimes, of course, we do feel weak and alone when these things happen, and that's okay. And that's okay. We can use these as opportunities. We can use these to maybe expand the area of where we're feeling comfortable. So again, another question for us to think about: what are we supposed to glean through the ups and downs of life? What are we supposed to glean when we go through any of the things that Solomon's set here? And he set them at opposites, didn't he? Because we experience opposites in life. He says, what are we supposed to glean through those ups and downs? We're going to jump now to Ecclesiastes 7. Ecclesiastes 7. I promise you this is not coffee in here. This is just water. Little chance I'm going to fall asleep during my own sermon. But you never know. Okay. A good name is better than precious ointment. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, for that is the end of all man, and the living will take it to heart. Now, we realize that, okay, some of these things that Solomon says, they're not easy to understand. They're not easy to grasp. And they can seem a bit of a downer. I'm with you on that. It says, sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Let's go to verse 8. The end of the thing is better than the beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? Oh, the good old days syndrome. He says, don't be asking that, for you do not inquire wisely concerning this. Let's go to verse 15. For I've seen everything in my days of Hevel. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in wickedness. And then he goes on to say, don't be overly righteous, nor overly wise, for why should you destroy yourself? Don't be overly wicked, nor be foolish, for why should you die before your time? And then real quick, hopefully it's on the same page in your Bible as it is with mine. I'm going to jump to chapter 8 and verse 14. There's a vanity there's a Hevel which occurs on earth, that there are just men whom it happens according to the work of the wicked, and there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I say this is also Hevel. So here in chapter 7, the one verse in chapter 8, Solomon really sets up a contradiction. He really sets up and says, okay, this can actually happen. The righteous maybe die sooner than what they would like, what we would like. The unrighteous live long. The unrighteous are reaping rewards we think really should be happening to the righteous, and the righteous are reaping things that we really think should be happening to the wicked. He says those things happen. At the beginning, he says to take time and think about what life is all about. And on occasions like we have today, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to think what life is all about, what the person meant to us, how that person lived his or her life, especially considering it's not forever. Acknowledging death, embracing death can give life meaning, causes us to reflect on how precious life is and how precious are the things that we can glean from it. And as Solomon said at the beginning of the book, it's not just about accumulating X, Y, or Z. Talks about here also patience, thoughtful consideration, slow to anger, slow to upset. Just thinking it just keeps getting worse and worse. The good old days are behind us. It's just, life is just bad right now. And sometimes the unrighteous do have it better on appearances. Maybe the righteous have it worse. What are we going to do with that? What are we going to do with that? Now, a Bible study of him by itself, I'm not going to try to, go into verse 16 here when he says, don't be overly righteous. And then he says, don't be overly wicked. That means, can you be a little wicked? But without going too much into that, one of the better explanations I've heard about that is not being legalistic and not being so nervous about doing everything just by the jot in the tittle that, as Christ told the Pharisees, you're very careful to, measure out the tithe of the mint and the anise and cumin, but you've forgotten the big picture. What I take from this verse is don't forget the big picture. Live life. Don't be paranoid about legalistic correctness. Okay, allow life to play out. All right, let's go to Ecclesiastes 9. We're just going to read a couple verses here. Ecclesiastes 9, verses 11 through 12. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, the battle is not to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time. Like a fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare, so the sons of man are snared in an evil time, when it falls suddenly upon them. The race is not always to the fast. Time and chance can and does happen to us all. Life is just not scripted. It's just not scripted. So considering Ecclesiastes 7, 8, and 9 here, what are we supposed to glean in considering the life that we have, that sometimes the righteous don't always appear to be on top, and also considering the fruit of patience? What are we supposed to glean with these concepts that we just read about here? So at this point in the message, I would like to, just take a pause and maybe summarize a couple of takeaways. One takeaway that Solomon certainly says here, and we'll say later in a couple of verses that we will read, is enjoy the things and time of this life, but don't set your inner being on the physical. He says this is hevel. This is going to come and this is going to go. Those things don't give real meaning to life. But he does say enjoy life. He does say appreciate it. He does say treasure it, but for reasons other than the gathering. Ecclesiastes is about using time, life, etc. to develop the heart and nature of God. It is not a health and wealth gospel. The Bible is not a health and wealth gospel. We as human beings might be more comfortable with that, but that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. It's about developing the heart and the nature of God in every aspect of our life. We can't change the past. Solomon says, looking to the past as this great time, he says that's futile. The future is going to have randomness. It's not going to be a nice linear equation that us mathematicians would like to have. He says, ride the uncertainty. Ride the uncertainty. Focus on making today successful, no matter if it doesn't quite meet our expectations. As a little sidebar, when we talk about expectations, of course, we have to consider that maybe sometimes our expectations are realistic, but maybe we also need to consider that maybe sometimes our expectations are not realistic. That's a good exercise for us to look at. Sometimes they're going to be met, and sometimes they're not going to be met. We just simply, Solomon is saying, we need to be able to lean into what life really is. And then as a kind of a last mini summary at this point, life has meaning even if we can't see through the hevel. Life has meaning even if we can't see through the fog or make sense of it. Challenges stretch and pull us. Challenges stretch and pull us. Our initial comfort zone may be here. And again, that's different for everybody. Some people it's here, some people here. But if we allow it, life can broaden that. We can become more comfortable and realize what there is to take away, even if we are not comfortable. We can find we can operate in a wider set of experiences. So I don't know if anybody here has panned for gold. I have never panned for gold. Okay. YouTube is wonderful though, isn't it? You can learn anything on YouTube. Not that I tried learning to pan for gold on YouTube, but I did watch it on YouTube. Okay. I did learn how to renovate a house on YouTube. Okay. Now, when you watch somebody panning for gold, and we've seen it in the movies and whatever, obviously it seems pretty repetitive, doesn't it? You're doing a lot of the same things. It looks hard. It looks like it can be frustrating when you're getting this much dirt for this much gold. And you may wonder, am I making any progress at all? But the person keeps going. Now, what counts in the end? Does it count how big your pile of dirt is? Is that what you're taking home? No. The amount of water you've used, you watch that stream just keep on going. How many tens of gallons of water have come by? No. That you've set up the most efficient system. I don't know if we have any engineers in here, and they've set up the most efficient system. Is that what really counts? No. In the end, it's the gold. It's the gold. That's our life. Not about how much we've done, how much pile of dirt, maybe the dirt looks shiny, new car, whatever, that we've accumulated. The gold is what we glean out of it, a relationship with God, a relationship with others, adopting the nature of God. That's the gold. We may not be able to see it all the time. It may just come in little bits every day, but that's what we're after. All right, we're going to step out of Ecclesiastes for just a second. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy 8 and verses 2 through 3. And Moses is having Israel remember certain things. And he said in verse 2 of Deuteronomy chapter 8, you should remember that the Lord your God led you this way 40 years in the wilderness. And we could say our lives, he's led us in our lives, to humble you, to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, your fathers did not know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And he goes on to talk about your garments didn't wear out like this. But here in Deuteronomy, he's calling back to the Exodus, and he's reminding Israel that the journey meant something. It's not just about reaching the promised land. For us, it's not just about the kingdom of God, Christ returning. We're all looking forward to that, and we could go on and on about that. But the journey means something. There is something that we need to glean from this journey, and the journey that has ups and downs and everything that we just read about in Ecclesiastes, especially chapter 3. So again, just some questions for us to think about. And as you've probably noticed already, I'm not going to attempt to answer all these questions today. I just want us to think about these questions. What does our relationship with God mean when we experience Ecclesiastes and not Proverbs? When we think we've done everything correct. I remember having this conversation years ago with a very close friend. And the person said to me, I'm doing these things and I just don't see the blessings. I just don't see the blessings. I'm not seeing the getting the job or whatever else the case may be. What does our relationship with God mean when we experience Ecclesiastes and not Proverbs? Will we still choose God even if life is difficult? And I'm not meaning, we walk out the door, choose God, but when we are living our life day to day, will we still choose God? Or will we become rattled, maybe forget to pray, maybe forget that there's something here, and we become so focused on, whatever suffering we may be going through at that time. What can we do when life is difficult to continue walking the way? Continue walking the way. All right. So 3 main points from Ecclesiastes. One is the march of time, is the march of time. And that's what Ecclesiastes talk about. Some things are permanent, no matter what we do. Some things repeat. They come and go on a daily basis. Other parts of our lives are always changing. And life in that way is like the vapor. It's like smoke. It takes different shapes. Sometimes the meaning is not always clear. Sometimes we can't see through whatever it is we're going through, and we can't understand, and maybe won't understand immediately, or even in the not too distant future, what purpose is this supposed to serve, what I'm going through right now. It comes and goes. Maybe we say to ourselves, I just can't seem to get it right. Is God still going to be there for me? I live this life, I get up in the morning, and I just can't seem to get it all together. Is God still there for me? Of course, we've already discussed about not saying, well, the past is better. Christ said, well, on the other hand, don't take any anxious thought for tomorrow. So on the one hand, don't focus on, how the past was wonderful and, leave it to Beaver, glorious. And, and then Christ says, well, don't take anxious thought for tomorrow. Look at what we can do today. Look at what we can glean today, no matter what today throws at us. Now it doesn't mean we don't plan for tomorrow. Of course we do. But Christ was saying, don't get all rattled about what's going to happen tomorrow, the next day. Think about the moment that you are in. Think about the day that you're in, the hour that you're in, the opportunity that you have, whomever you're talking with, whatever experience you're going through, and what can be gleaned out of that. Good or bad, ugly, pretty, what can be gleaned out of that? So he says, there's this march of time that goes along. Okay, we're not going to be able to stop it, but from every day, we can glean something from that. The second point from Ecclesiastes is, yes, we're not going to live forever in these physical bodies. We are all going to die, maybe even suffer. The wicked and the righteous. When God made us physical, of course, death becomes inevitable. If there had been a better way, I'm sure God would have done it. But following God is not just about eternal life. It's about learning from the good and the bad times that we experience. In the end, we do have the hope of eternal life, and we're going to see that. But appreciate today, take advantage of every day. And think to ourselves, okay, what is the point of sometimes suffering? What can I learn from that? Why do Christians suffer if they're obeying God? Maybe it's empathy. Today and after Christ's return, that we can empathize with those who are going through that. Just like Christ suffered when he came here so that he could empathize with us as our high priest. Third main point from Ecclesiastes, life is random. It's not always predictable. The race is not always to the swift. The victory is not always to the strong. Sometimes we may wonder to ourselves, how can good people do bad things? That's a wrestling dichotomy, isn't it? We talked about at the beginning of the message, things that we wrestle with. What happens when we see people, Christians, maybe do things we know they shouldn't? What happens when we see in ourselves who are doing things we know we shouldn't? Okay. We may ask ourselves the question, why don't I feel close to God? Or if the random's going to happen anyway, why even bother? So let's take a look at a few more scriptures from Ecclesiastes, and some of those questions we are going to answer. So let's go back to Ecclesiastes, and we're going to go to chapter 11. So what can we do? So Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 1 says here, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7, and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. And then in verse 6, in the morning sow your seed, in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both be alike or be good. So one thing we can do, need to do, Ecclesiastes tells us to do, is still learn wisdom and live in reverence of God. Still learn wisdom and live in reverence of God. Still do the right thing. Still try to find and learn and adopt that goal that is the nature of God. And we see that here in verse 11, verses 1 through 2. He says, cast your bread upon the waters. He said, give a serving to 7, give it to 8. Be thinking about other people. That's a part of developing that heart of God. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 12, in verse 1. It says, remember now the Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come, and the years draw when you say, I have no pleasure in them. Verse 13. Let us hear the whole conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, and every secret thing, whether good or evil. So it reiterates, remember God. Remember God. That's the first thing we need to do. We can learn from Ecclesiastes. Still learn that wisdom. Still live in reverence of God. Remember God, because he is going to work everything out. Even if we can't see it now, even if it even doesn't work out now, God is going to work things out. Now, God is not sadistic. He is not heartless, but he does have a way of working above and through and around life, no matter what our individual lives throw at us. And that's the promise that we have at the very end of the book of Ecclesiastes. Remember God, because he is not going to forget. He is not going to forget mercy. He is not going to forget justice. He is not going to forget you. He is not going to forget me. He is not going to forget. He will remember, and he will put it right. And even though Ecclesiastes describes the ups and downs and that there is random chance in life and life is not scripted, it is still much, much better to follow God. I mean, that's a duh, obviously, okay? But still, the other things are going to happen. The other things are going to happen. So still learn wisdom, still live in reverence of God, still do the right thing, and God will not forget. God will not forget. Second thing we can do, should do, is we can control our perspective no matter what happens. Or let's at least put it this way. We can really work on controlling our perspective no matter what happens. I'm not saying I'm 100% good at that. I'm not. But we can live life with, a little bit more of an open hand. Everything that happens to us, good and bad, there are lessons to be found in that. Lessons to be found. Let's go, we're already here at the back of the book. We're going to go to back to Ecclesiastes 11 in just a second. But it's important to accept Hevel. Important to accept Hevel. Accept that life is uncertain. Even following God does not guarantee a life without stress, challenges, ups and downs. He never promised that. He never promised that. In fact, in a few cases, he said it's exactly the opposite that's going to happen, through much tribulation, through challenges. Ecclesiastes 11, verse 10. Therefore, remove sorrow from your heart. So here he talks about, schooling our perspective. Maybe that's the better way, developing our perspective. Maybe that's the better way to put it instead of the word control. But he says, remove sorrow from your heart, put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. Did I skip Oh, I put down the wrong verses. There is no Ecclesiastes 11:11. Okay, so I actually wanted to read verses 9 and 10. Not verses 10 and 11. Rejoice, O man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that God is going to bring you into judgment, that there is going to be, there's going to be some sort of cause and effect at the end of the day. And then he says, remove sorrow from your heart. So in a couple of different places now, we've read here in Ecclesiastes 11 about appreciating the time when we do have health, when we do have good things going. And he says, go ahead and enjoy those. Go ahead and enjoy those, but realize and that life is more than that. And take a look at how we can school our perspective to the long haul, to the gold, not just now. Okay, third and last thing then that we can learn from Ecclesiastes is what we experience has meaning even if we can't make sense of it. What we experience has meaning. It has value even if we can't make sense of it, even if we don't understand where it's going. God is not going to forget. He is eternal. He is building the eternal in us. We have the vision of the eternal. And the things that we go through, even if we can't always see them, even if the hevel is thick, even if it's constantly moving and shifting, there is something there that has meaning for us. Now we're going to jump back to Ecclesiastes 3. In verse 10, he says, I have seen the God-given tasks which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has put eternity in their hearts, except no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to the end. We can't see that whole picture that God has. Verse 12, for I know nothing is better for them to rejoice, to do good in their life, that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is a gift of God. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing can be taken away from it. God does it, that men should fear before him. So he's saying here in light of what God is doing, with that still in the forefront of our mind, not the pile of dirt, okay, in the forefront of our mind, but what God is doing, he says, we should enjoy life. We should appreciate life. We should value it, those times. Even if some of those times are sorrowful times, as we've already read about. He says, value those. Verse 21, he talks about who knows the spirit of the sons of men, which goes upward, and the spirit of the animal, which goes down to earth. So I perceive that nothing is better that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen afterwards? So Solomon is not, while he says there is value in the rough times, he is not saying that, we should just live with a frown on our face the whole time and just, look for ways to suffer. That's not what he's saying at all. Okay. He is saying, though, appreciate them for what they are there for. Verses 16 through 17, same chapter. Moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. And I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there's a purpose and time for every work. So nothing is escaping God's attention. Ecclesiastes 8 and verse 12. Ecclesiastes 8 and verse 12. So in Ecclesiastes, again, there are sobering thoughts, but there are also encouraging thoughts here. Takes maybe just a little bit more to find them. For though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, for will he prolong his days, which are a shadow or hevel, because he does not fear God. So we have the hope of God's justice, God's plan to fuel a life of honesty, of integrity, of walking with God. You know, and sometimes there are the ups and downs. When God told Paul at one point, as we're all familiar, he says, you know, what you're going through, my grace is going to have to be simply sufficient for you. And it's not going to go away. It's going to be, I'm going to walk with you, but I'm not going to relieve you of this, whatever that was. All right, we're going to actually finish up in Hebrews. So hopefully that was a bit of a survey of Ecclesiastes and what we can take away from Ecclesiastes. We're going to finish up in Hebrews 11, at the end of the chapter of Hebrews 11. Beginning in verse 33, we know it talks about men and women in the faith chapter here, and because of faith, they did certain things. There's a summary statement beginning in verse 33, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of the fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to the fight, the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Now, if we would stop there, we would say, okay, that sounds all great. You know, this is how I want it to go in my life. When I'm having troubles, I want to be, subduing kingdoms, back to our scale, of course. None of us are kings here. I want to obtain the promises. I want to stop the mouths of the lions that are coming at me. And guess what? Verse 35 continues. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, and yes, in chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. And it goes on, they wandered in deserts and caves. We have life sometimes. Sometimes our life is verse 33, 34, first part of 35, and sometimes it's what we just read. Okay, not to the scale of what these people went through. Maybe someday in the future, we don't know. But we all have, in other words, ups and downs. We see that. These people had their ups and downs. Verse 39. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise in that life. Despite being people of faith, they did not reap in that life the final promise. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made complete apart from us. Some big victories, some immediate defeats, we have those. How are we made complete? By how we respond to life, to everything that life throws at us. And then how we translate those lessons towards others. How we translate those lessons towards others. In other words, basically following Jesus, just like Christ and his teachings. We walk the extra mile. We turn the other cheek. We give up our shirt and our coat. We invite those who cannot repay. We help those who are outside of our circle, whatever that circle may be. We forgive when we are wronged. We seek forgiveness when we do the wrong. We do good to our enemies. We don't revile. We don't judge. We don't slander. Not anxious about the temporary things of this life. Christ said to do these things now, and it's not always easy. And life throws its challenges at us. It's not always fun. But God will not forget. And while things in this life may be heavy from time to time, maybe more often we would like, the treasure we are gleaning is eternal.